Today's teardown is on another highly requested engine on this channel. We're going to take apart this 4.6 liter all aluminum 3-valve V8 from a 5-9 Ford Mustang GT. This is an engine that I normally sell here at Import Apart. In fact, I have one in stock right now. There also is an iron block version in the 6-10 Explorer and Mountaineer. I have one of those as well if you need those. But this is an engine that came from another yard, and I believe it to be a returned engine. That is an engine that yard sold or another yard sold. It was installed into a customer's vehicle. They found a problem with it, and then they brought it back. And I think that because it has no pigtails on it, it's got red plugs in the intake, it's got no hoses, nothing's really taken apart the wrong way on this engine, and it also has heat tabs glued to both cylinder heads and the engine block. A lot of yards use those to prove whether an engine's been overheated, like an improper installation situation. But this engine has those, which leads me to think this engine was brought back, and we're going to find out why. Here are those heat tabs I was talking about. When they get to a certain temperature, the center will melt out, and that kind of proves an engine's been overheated. Also, this engine's been painted, and Ford doesn't do that. Obviously, a yard did. This engine also leaked some brand new fresh oil all over my shop floor because it wasn't drained. They never are. First things first, we'll get the coils and plugs out and see what the plugs look like. Now, I know some of these 3-valve engines are notorious for breaking spark plugs. However, these heads are coming off anyway, so I'm just going to hope for the best and use my impact. This is a set of brand new Motorcraft Platinum plugs. These are the right plug that are supposed to be in there. There's no damage whatsoever. Nothing's been mechanically regapped. I just don't understand why you would put brand new plugs in an engine and have a problem with it and then not take them back out for the next engine unless you just gave up on the car. Next, we're going to pull the intake manifold, and these are very tough to pull. Now, because this intake was mounted so well with no bolts, there's water in some of these intake ports. This engine was probably outside for some time. But I don't see any bent valves or metal, nothing alarming yet, just lots of water. Now, before I can pull the driver's valve cover, I need to get the dipstick tube out of the way. I'm looking forward to this so much. Huh. Well, that was easy. Now, the driver's side valve cover. Well, this engine clearly has water in it or had moisture in it. There's lots of rust on the cam lobes. The rockers are super rusty. The head bolts are even rusty. There's some pitting on the camshafts. That's kind of unfortunate. But I don't see anything terrible outside of that yet. Now for the passenger. Now this side has a lot less of that rust stuff, but it's still rusty. The head bolts here are rusty. The cam cap bolts. Some of the rockers are rusty. Yeah, this engine definitely had water sitting in it for some time. One thing I want to check before I peel any more parts off is to see if this engine turns over. Now, it did have water in it, so I'm not expecting a lot. It might even shoot some water out. Nope. Feels all right, just a little stiff. There's probably some rust on the cylinder wall. Next, we're going to pull the timing cover, and to do that, I've got to pull the crank pulley. It was glued on. That's a first. we'll get the water pump pulley off. Yeah, it came right off. Didn't even need the hammer. It appears someone already removed the oil pan bolts to the timing cover. So let's go ahead and see if we can get this timing cover off. Let's see if there's a good place to pry. Everything looks pretty nice in here. All the rails are in good shape. There's no broken plastic. Doesn't look like the tensioner is overly extended. Chain looks good. Phasers aren't falling apart, at least not literally falling apart. Probably still make noise, they all do. Yeah, everything looks okay. I don't think this was a timing issue. I did notice that there's a bolt in the pan. The question is why? While the chain's on it, I'm going to take the cam phasers off and we'll peel all the chains off so that we can get the heads off. Okay then. Still a lot of tension here. Now we're good. These look nice. All right, let's get this water pump off. Looks perfect. Now I'm going to take a moment and pull the exhaust manifolds off so they're out of the way. Now I'm going to take this water manifold out of the way. Now I'm going to rotate the engine on its side so I can get the head bolts out. Uh-oh, something's moving around in there. All right, head should come right off. Cool. Ringing in the new year, getting peed on. The engine clearly has water in it, but it looks really clean. I don't think that water's been in there very long. There's not a lot of rust on the cylinder walls. The pistons look really good. I don't see any damage like debris came through here. Looks okay so far. The head also looks pretty good. I don't see any damage to the valves or the combustion chamber. This cylinder is pretty dirty, but again, it could be that this cylinder had water sitting in it for the longest. We did turn this engine over, so now it's time to pull the driver's head. Should come right off. Please don't turn me into Miles Davis, please, please. Much better. Same story on this bank. All the pistons look pretty good. There's just some water in there, and it's likely rainwater. No signs of debris. Not really a lot of rust, if any at all. Cylinder walls look nice. That head also looks pretty nice. Again, it still has a cam in it, so of course there's going to be open valves. But I don't see anything overly apparent. Now that there are no heads on it, I can turn the short block over. We're going to see how this feels. Ooh, that's not good. Definitely doesn't feel great. I don't hear anything loose though. But I wonder what we're going to find. Time to turn this engine upside down so we can pull the pan. All right then. As I turned this engine over, I realized one of the AC compressor bolt bosses is cracked. This is pretty common when the AC compressor is hit in an accident. I actually had one of these that broke half of this bolt boss off, is just gone. And one of my dismantlers, he's an excellent welder and fabricator. He actually was able to repair the engine block, and I was able to sell the engine with a discount, of course, having been repaired. All right, let's pull this pan. Someone has pulled most of the bolts out for me. Well, that was my 3/8 bit. Let's try this again. Well, there's the rest of the oil pan bolts. There's one. There's one. Why would these end up there? Well, the inside of the pan has definite signs of water and bolts. I think someone pulled this pan, threw half the bolts back in here, and then put a couple bolts to hold the pan back onto the engine. Still signs of moisture on that windage tray right here. The rest of this looks all right, but if we look inside this pickup, there's like some jelly substance here. It's like some Fimoco flavored jelly. Let's see if there's anything else in here. I bet there is. Uh-oh. What is that? Well, that's not right. There's some metal in there. Where did that come from? It's not a lot, but it's safe to say it's not supposed to be there. Let's go ahead and get the pickup out. Now we'll remove the oil pump. Let's split this oil pump and see what the inside looks like. It's not terrible. Some grooves on this gear here, but not on the actual pump surface. The housing has some corresponding marks on it as well. It's not terrible though. Definitely seen worse. Let's get the oil filter housing out of the way. Now for the windage tray. Oh, wow. Wow, this is way worse than I thought. Wow. Wow, wow is all I gotta say. I did not expect this. This is pretty impressive. Look at that rod. That piston's broken, the rod's bent. That rod's bent. That rod's bent. That rod's bent. That rod's really bent. To the left even. I think even that rod's bent. It's a whole engine full of bent rods. That is pretty awesome. Let's get this apart. Okay, let's start at the back. Turn this over to the next two. Oh, okay. Good God. Man, it's still tough to turn over. How much water does this take? You drive it into the ocean? I mean, these are bent horrifically. I mean, these even have marks from being polished on the sides of the bores. Oh, that one's not bad. It's just bent in two directions. Holy cow, look at this. Bottom of that piston is it's worn through from the counterbalance. They were trying to power through the river. How do you do this to an engine? I can understand why they didn't want to put all the bolts back in the pan. This is not a good engine. Look at the right angle there. I am so impressed. Also, how did these rods not break? I don't understand. How are they so soft, but they don't break? I'm impressed, but the bearings look nice, if that's any consolation. To get a better look at the damage on the block, I'm going to go ahead and pull the crank so you guys can see this. Oh, it's like that again, okay. You can see at the bottom of the bore where the damage is from that rod making contact over and over again. You can see on the other banks through this bore. I don't even understand how this engine held together. It doesn't make any sense. There's that damage there at the bottom of the bore. Pretty much renders the block not worth doing anything with. This is going to the scrap bin, which is why I stopped pulling the crank out of it. Most cylinders have this damage. I should say at least 5 cylinders have that damage. It's like a keyway cut out of it. Super impressed. And the crankshaft is polished in certain areas. It's like knife edge, but it's like rod edged, really. Let's call it what it is. And there is some cylinder wall damage, as you can see. That's from that piston that was coming apart. This is destined for the scrap bin. It's pretty sad. When people talk about a particular vehicle or engine being thirsty, this is not the solution. Do not crash your car into a body of water. You're supposed to get your big gulps at 7-Eleven. And all jokes aside, I was pretty impressed with the way this engine held together because it definitely took a big drink. I've never seen an engine bend all 8 rods at once, and likely it could have still run or come close to it. It ran long enough to bend all of those rods that far and wear the bottom of the pistons down on the counterbalance. That was very impressive that it didn't scatter. Unfortunately, that short block is pretty much trash. I kind of stopped pulling the crank. The splayed bolts, the side bolts for the main caps, fought me like the last modular engine I took apart. And yes, I know I could get them out with enough time, but at this point, the block is scrap. I don't trust the crank whatsoever. So it's all going to end up in the scrap bin. There's no real sense in pulling it apart and spending hours doing so. The good news about this teardown is that I got some parts that I like to keep around the shop and a few things to sell. I can sell the cylinder heads once they're checked, and I got valve covers and a timing cover, and I do buy a lot of those cars, and they're usually hit in the front, so I like to keep those parts on hand in case I have to repair one with a valve cover or a timing cover. It works out pretty well. And I'm going to do something a little bit different like I did on the last hydraulically damaged engine on that LS4. You guys left some hilarious comments on that video. Some of them were just a little much, I'm not going to lie. However, I have 8 bent rods from this engine, 8 of them, and it wouldn't really be fair to send them all to the same person. So the best 8 comments in the first week, the only way I'm going to measure this is by the amount of likes. So if you make a comment and it gets the most amount of likes in the first week, the top 8 number of likes in the first week, I'll send you a rod and piston, one of the bent ones. I'm not going to pick and choose who gets what. However, you will get a rod and piston. I don't care where you're at. As long as you're on this planet, I will get it to you. And as always, I love all the comments, all the feedback, and even the suggestions and the criticism and all that good stuff. I love it all. I wish you guys a Happy New Year, and I'll catch you on the next one.